Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Isetu Mangotwa, and I will be your host for this evening. Welcome to the grand finale of our webinar series, which has been titled The Unfinished Business of Economic Transformation. Our topic for tonight is co-creating a new vision for inclusive and equitable economies and societies. And we are focusing on the collaboration between business, government, and civil society. With our guest of honor, Mr. Sipho Pityana, a very warm BMF welcome to you, Butsipo, and thank you for so graciously giving of your time this evening and leading our discussions this evening. Just to set the context of our whole webinar series, this year, this virtual series effectively replaced what we normally have every October, which is the BMF annual conference, where we really tackle the most topical and pressing issues concerning transformation, socioeconomic transformation, Black economic empowerment in all spheres. And obviously in the COVID era, everything is really centered around the economic recovery and how Black business, Black professionals, how they really play a part, a central part in this economic recovery. The BMF has identified that we need to revive the conversations around the fact that socioeconomic transformation in the country has really not been realized. 26 years into democracy, every year the employment equity stats come out and we are all up in arms at what we see coming through those stats. You see us on the fringes of even big infrastructure projects like the recently launched Mooikloof Integrated Development Project. And we still see lily white boards and management teams. And, my concern is even with the economic recovery plan, how do we ensure that we are not once again left at the periphery of our own economy? To this end, we developed a series of webinars titled The Unfinished Business of Economic Transformation to focus attention in areas where lack of transformation are most keenly felt. So this series really commenced on the 23rd of July and has had the honor of hosting illustrious guests such as Professor Patrick Lumumba, the Honorable Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, as well as Dr. Maria Ramos. So we've really had an illustrious lineup, and tonight is no exception. Tonight, we will really start with opening remarks from BMF President Mr. Andile Nomlala, followed by our keynote address from Mr. Sipho Pityana, who I will introduce formally just before he speaks. So without further ado, really, I think I've set the context for tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing opening remarks from, and no stranger to these platforms, BMF President Mr. Andile Nomlala.
Thank you, Isetu, and thanks for having us. I must firstly greet our former Deputy President, Meko Kokumal. I see her on the participants. And I must say thank you, Butsipo, for giving us your time. It's quite important. And I remember in one of our conversations, you spoke about your era as the first generation and the second generation of director generals in our country, and the impact that you then, which by the way was shown even by the records, that during that time we had a rising trajectory of economic inclusion, even though it was at the very, very beginning of our post-apartheid South Africa. So we do know that we saved the best for last when we called you in, because you have an operational experience of what you guys inherited in government and what did you do to try to transform and change the picture of government. And today, despite the few incidences that BMF had bemoaned at the beginning of 2019, we can comfortably say that government was fairly changed, and it's representative of South African citizens. And some other people don't know that there was no transformation even at government level, because South Africa was managed by the apartheid regime, so the institutions had the likes of IDC, the likes of the likes of SARS, and the rest were quite untransformed. So we do really appreciate your efforts. But I think fast forward to the fourth and the fifth administration, we lost momentum. There's no doubt that we lost momentum. We lost momentum on many fronts, but key to them was the economic growth and the transformation agenda. States SA, employment equity, BE Commission, all of them do show. Somebody was asking on Twitter recently, but what happened to the BE deals? Because there are none in these days. You hear about it here and there. Then it tells you that the economic structure of the existing business community is still very much untransformed. And we have seen recently the reports that came out talking about more so into from your organization, President Pijan, who started talking about economic reform and how do we reconfigure and reorganize our economy post the COVID period. As Esetu just said when she opened, is that the risk we're sitting with is that you would end up in a situation where the inclusion part on the economic resuscitation efforts that are being made, again, could be left behind. We could be left behind. And we have no one, I think, and in this day and age, we have no one to blame but ourselves. Organizations like BMF, I had a chat conversation with the colleagues earlier in the morning about the irresponsible statement, for instance, that the EFF president had made. And the reflection and the introspection we were making there as members is that even if we do go and back on Julius, but what is the ultimate impact? What is the BMF's position, policy position on what could we do to enhance and fast track economic transformation in our country? And the last time we were seen in the scene was when we were actually formulating the very same BE policies, affirmative action and employment equity. I think the generation of the professionals of our time, Putsipo, are not living to your expectations, even to the extent that people of yourselves are still had to be dragged and called to lead strategic organizations in the country. It means that we haven't adequately raised our hands. And if we did raise our hands, it's a question of whether we're entitled to be given the responsibility or we have to show our mettle to assume the positions of the positions of responsibility. Because I don't think that power or responsibility is gonna ever be given to us if we don't take it ourselves. So as this generation, we know that we have the 10 years of losing momentum. And now that resulted into an unfortunate economic consequence that has tripled or doubled or fourpled or quadrupled by the effects of both the downgrade and the COVID crisis. Our unemployment rate, our growth, economic growth prospect, our debt to GDP ratio are astronomical. I mean, it was shocking when the finance minister in his midterm budget announced that we have moved from 63.3% to 81.8%, something that they had projected that our debt to GDP ratio would be at those levels in 3 years' time. But COVID came in and fast-tracked that 3 years within months. Now, it's without a doubt that the economic crisis that we face is as catastrophic as any other period in history in our country. And therefore, the generation, myself and those that comes before me, must stand up and be counted. Because I think we can plan, we can talk, but at some point in time, there would be a need for men and women that must put the rubber on the road to implement and effect the change that we want to see. So tonight, for us, particularly for me, the expectation is very simple with Sipo, is that we want to take counseling from soldiers like yourselves. And many other people, I saw comments, don't know, because they see you now as business people, they don't know where you were first made and the impact and the role that some of you have played to deliver even the middle class that we have in our country. Because public service at the time, and it ended during your time with Sipo, that you would find top class professionals in the public service who would move on to private sector and occupy strategic and key positions. Now, if you work for a public service or public entity, you are as typical corrupt as anything, according to the eyes of the principles in our economy. And by the way, it's not without some pinch of truth in it, because many of our own professionals are implicated and embroiled in the certain behaviors that comes out at the Zondo Commission. We don't expect, and people must know this, even from the Masina element, is that we have to bemoan and be much more harder to people of our own who gets to be embroiled in corruption, because they know our circumstances a little bit much closer to our counterparts. The economic exclusion of Africans has been going on for 400 years. And I don't know that during this era, when we preside over government and we set policies and regulations, we could still expect that the people that had tried to oppress us for 400 years would willingly and all of a sudden be our allies. But when we put a Black professional in a position of responsibility, it becomes a much more of a betrayal for them to get to steal, for them to not do their jobs efficiently and in a prudent way. It becomes an indictment to us as a whole, not to just them. People are offended, and quite correctly so, when Julius says Black lawyers are losing cases, whatever the comment he was making. It might have been quite correctly so, a certain Black lawyer that was irresponsible and everything else, but people must understand that when a Black professional doesn't get to be at his or her best, that it doesn't become an indictment to only herself or himself. It becomes a Black race issue. And we might decry the EFF president, but we do know that Julius had championed not so long ago critical Black causes. And we're not saying that when he errs, we mustn't deal with him, but we must be very careful of getting into the spectacle of wanting to be defocused and being busy squabbling about sideshows when the real meat is on the table and none of us are able to execute and take it and advance the interest of our people. Our people are poor, and therefore we're not going to be embroiled in the idea of who gets arrested before who. If a person is Black and has been a thug or has been embroiled or is alleged to have done these wrong things, those people must be arrested and they must be taken through the court processes. And if they are found guilty, we must disown them as one of us. We can't have criminals and people who steal from the poor and we still have any sense of allegiance to them. We must decry, we must isolate, we must ostracize, we must exclude those people within our communities. I want to even go further, Putsipo, to say, in some instances, I wish that the Hawks were as prudent as to even take into questioning even the people that attend these conspicuous consumption parties, just to know that when people have resources and money, and I'm not saying that Black people would have resources and money out of corruption only, but those that are known have been linked and some are implicated in glaring, evident things. We must isolate them. They must not have audience of people that comes and parties with them. They must go and spend their money with their corrupt friends, wherever they spend their money with their corrupt friends at. But for Black people, for the Black race to rise, we must never embrace, nor even take it as a glimpse of chance of success, a person who earns his living through corruption. We must not need, because we do know the actions. These are our friends, these are our brothers, these are our parents, these are our sisters and wives and husbands that are stealing. We do know that they haven't ended the trade. If you look at the COVID-19 corruption, it was an overnight companies that were registered today, tomorrow they're getting 100 million contracts. And other people are crying why white people are not being arrested. White people they made them middlemen. They didn't apply, they don't have relationship with the state on the tender basis. They just sit there and wait for you to win a tender, and then they supply you the PPE, and then you deal with your friends and corruptly so, and you come and order from them, and they make money, and they still go and wait for you to come and buy a BMW and an expensive Gucci jacket from them. Now, they are not the direct link in some of these instances to this corruption. The corruption becomes us, gullible, pliable people, because of whatever desperation. But we're not going to build a nation when we can't call each other out. We're never going to build a nation when we don't see the wrongs amongst us. So with those few words, I say have a great time in the BMF. We're really, really grateful that you are here, and we're looking forward to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andile Nomlala. As usual, very straightforward, very much to the point, very much touching on the key issues and not mincing your words regarding corruption and what I normally call whataboutism, which is used as a diversion to say, what about Steinhoff? What about this wide corruption? What about apartheid corruption? I mean, I think you're stating very clearly that we need to deal very decisively with corruption because it speaks to the heart of things like a lack of state capacity, of resources that are badly needed for service delivery, for socioeconomic issues, for food, for jobs, for infrastructure, which will create jobs. It's actually even more despicable that it is our own people doing this to each other. So I'm not a fan of what about Steinhoff, when is Marcus Jooste getting arrested? Yes, we want him arrested, but that does not mean we're not going to celebrate and be happy to see accountability and consequence, whoever it may be coming to first, no matter what the order. Butsipo, I am going to try and condense your CV into a few lines. So please bear with me, and if I leave anything out, you just write me a note on the side. Mr. Sipho Pityana has extensive experience across the economy, having cut his teeth early in his career in the trade union movement, which led him to being the first Director General of the Department of Labor in President Mandela's government. As president of BUSA, a confederation of business in South Africa, he is the epitome of the leader of South African business. He serves served and serves in both executive and non-executive capacity in locally and internationally listed boards, as well as running his own company, Izingwe Capital and Izingwe Holdings, of which he is the chair. He's currently chairman of JSE-listed Anglo Gold Ashanti and Redefined Properties. He also sits on the board of APSA and is co-chair of the World Economic Forum Africa Stewardship Board. In academia, Sipho Pityana recently retired as the chairperson of the Governing Council of the University of Cape Town. So I think there's really no better person to really play all these roles, because we are speaking about the role of business, which you tick that box, labor, you tick that box, government, you tick that box, and civil society. So you're really 4 in 1 this evening. And I hope you're going to be able to pivot between all of these perspectives with Sipho as you really take us through your thoughts about, the role of business, government, labor, and civil society in transformation and in rebuilding this economy. And obviously, what's top of mind currently is obviously the president's reconstruction and recovery plan with its 4 pillars. I, for one, read somewhere that they've said that they are going to give priority to the areas in the economy that will have the greatest impact on women, on youth, and in small business. I want you, Putsipo, in your address to really touch on how are we going to achieve that? If we haven't managed to achieve it thus far, what is going to make that be the focus area of the new economic recovery plan, particularly because, as we know, established, and I'll say white in inverted commas, those established businesses are more agile, they have more resources, the economies of scale mean that they compete better on price, and all of those. So how are we going to achieve this focus on small business and women and youth when we haven't been able to achieve it thus far? So, Butsipo, thank you very, very much for joining us this evening, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Program Director, Esetu, and President of the BMF, the Leadership Collective. And it's a great pleasure and very good evening to all the distinguished participants in this timely and very crucial conversation. At the outset, let me express my sincere appreciation and deep appreciation to BMF and its leadership for inviting me to contribute my thoughts and reflections around some of the issues that you want us to discuss. I'm deeply honored and humbled by the opportunity to share my views on a conversation that needs to be had. And at the risk of immodesty, right up front, I'd like to issue a challenge and say to all participants that our contributions in these conversations should be distilled into concrete and sustained actions if we are to ensure that meaningfully we have equitable economic outcomes for all South Africans. After all, we need to remind ourselves that the preamble of our overarching social contract, the Constitution, enjoins us, and I quote, to improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person, close quote. And so when I say to you today that this inspirational vision of our nation has been betrayed, I dare you to contradict me. Evidence abound attests to this painful reality of a dream deferred. The argument, therefore, for sustained economic growth and global competitiveness is trite. In his first speech as president of the country, President Ramaphosa acknowledged that the economy was not growing fast enough to make a dent on inequality and unemployment. We must take this as a lesson born out of our real experience that unless economic growth strategies are deliberate and emphatic about their inclusive and redress properties, we can't be surprised when they continue to reproduce inequalities and marginalization, and sometimes even accentuate these. We've been witnessing the economy shed more jobs and reverse the gains of the early period of our democracy, as Andile has indicated, the president of BMF, following depressed economic activity and worsened by COVID-19 and lockdown restrictions that came with it. This underscores the imperative to accelerate economic reforms that are necessary to give the impetus to inclusive growth. Inclusive growth must mean, and I would like us to define this, in the first instance, labor-absorbing growth. After all, employment is the most effective tool for economic inclusion. It ranks above all else. But it must also mean that growth that sustains the growth of Black professional core and middle class, that reverses the gender inequalities and accelerate Black and women ownership participation in the commanding heights of the economy, not on the periphery. All of this giving due regard to enabling the state to ensure that the most vulnerable in our society, who don't have the wherewithal to get up and do these things on their own, have the protection of a social safety security net. That's who we are as a nation. That's what our constitution enjoins us, to take care of each other, but to define each other, not in the margins, but in the center of growing the cake and the benefits that come with it. Without including these critical elements in any growth strategies, our development trajectory will only reproduce the apartheid inequalities. We must remind ourselves about the severe setback for Black economic inclusion that came with the 2008 global financial crisis. A serious reversal of the gains we made in the early period of our transformation agenda. We would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't anticipate the same with the current crisis. That indeed in the workplaces, when we think retrenchments, that the most vulnerable perhaps are Black managers and indeed women managers. What does this mean? It means in part that economic downturns are a serious threat to this nation's agenda to redress inequalities, eliminate poverty, and reduce unemployment. I know for a fact that I'm preaching to the converted when I say the social cost of postponing crucial reforms is spiking, and those at the margins of economic activity were growing even more restless before the advent of the pandemic. These reforms should be capable of redefining the place of the previously marginalized in the economy. So they shouldn't be just about restarting the economy and enabling it to perform once again. But as we think about that, we must think very carefully about how we redefine those that were previously marginalized at the center of the solutions that we're bringing about. To achieve this shouldn't require corrupt conduct. And I'm so pleased and touched by the comments by the president of the BMF. And stealing from the poor should not be a consideration. These should arise as a result of carefully considered strategies that are tested in other jurisdictions that enable the mainstreaming of the marginalized. I have to say this, that one of President Cyril Ramaphosa's mistakes has been to assume that a change of guard without a concomitant change in economic policy trajectory would yield positive outcomes. Point at one significant economic reform introduced in the almost 3 years that our president has been in office. And so the deterioration in the economy has put paid to that idea. Rightly, the business community, along with other constituencies in NEDLAC and society general, are all frustrated with the absence of reforms and the lack of urgency in bringing these about. The social partners recognize that an inclusive economy powered by innovative and high growth companies, particularly SMEs, and strong private sector investments, are the key to a prosperous economy. It must be underlined that the Treasury's growth forecast for this year is well below the 8 to 8.5% decline forecast by some economists out there. This would constitute our worst economic contraction since the Great Depression of the 1930s, accentuating the point that the time to push ahead with long-awaited economic reforms has never been more urgent. I continue to contend that an educated and skilled workforce underpinned by sustained investment in the nurturing of the STEM skills is key to our global competitiveness. This is an imperative if we are to take advantage of the incredible potential of our young people. We need to collectively ensure that our potential is matched with the requisite education and training and projected labor market demands. And now, discriminatory labor practices, on whatever grounds, result in what we call allocative inefficiencies in the economy and should have no place in an inclusive growth, economic growth paradigm. And we can only do so if we are paddling in the same canoe, insofar as the inclusivity is concerned. I have had to remind myself, by the way, that I'm addressing Black professionals and corporate executives on this platform. And so consequently, this address would be incomplete without reflecting on what it all means for this strategic segment of our society. And let me tell you that when my feet are up and I write my memoirs in not too distant future, I guarantee you a chapter. You must look for it in those memoirs. It will be titled, and I quote, "A liberated Black professional, an accomplice to own enslavement." Close quote. You must look for that chapter. Let me be categorical. I'm deeply disappointed with the excruciatingly slow pace of transformation in corporate South Africa, and yet I refuse to give up. It is one of the biggest sources of trust deficit between business and society. Last year's employment equity report shows that while white men represent just 5.1% of the economically active population in our society, their representation in top management stands at 53%. That this remains a reality, 26 years since our freedom and 24 years since our final constitution, emphasizes the need for a different approach, perhaps, to the way we've been advancing the agenda for inclusion in this regard. Worth pointing out, too, is that the quantitative nature of the employment equity reports from the Employment Equity Commission masks a very sad reality of Black professional experience in corporate South Africa. And so in considering different strategies, we must candidly introspect without pointing a finger at others and ask ourselves why, given a permissive constitutional and legal framework, have we failed to effectively advance workplace transformation? Let me ponder to reflect on what, among many, these would include. And so from my perspective, I attribute these to a number of factors. The first is the doggedly entrenched and stubborn culture of racial discrimination in our society, including the workplace. I have to say that the subliminal racism that prevails in corporate South Africa is a manifestation of a fact that apartheid is alive and kicking in corporate South Africa. Many corporates are still deep, very deep, in pre-1994 slumber. It's as if 1994 never happened. This manifests in Black professionals with requisite qualification and sometimes more or appropriate and sometimes extensive experience, having their work second-guessed and consequently being overlooked for roles in favor of less qualified white counterparts. This is when you are reminded that unlike apartheid, the smiles flashed by the anti-transformation forces are indeed the greens that masks an underlying intent. And let me ponder and suggest, and I quote, "We're going to sort you out, and we'll do so this time with your full cooperation," close quote. And so the second is the failure of Black corporate leadership. those of us holding board, executive, and other strategic roles in these corporates. We must ask ourselves how we've used these to advance the agenda for transformation. We all know that qualification and experience are only a ticket to the game. But even more importantly is sponsorship. The continued patterns of employment and promotion that produce these racial inequalities in corporates are driven by the phenomenon of sponsorship. The sponsor is the influential leader in the company who vouches for you, who lets the system know that they respect and regard you as a valued individual, as a contributor. They lend their credentials and stake their standing behind your success. And suddenly, you are considered for training and exposed to career advancing opportunities and promotion, etc. When you make a mistake and the system seeks to condemn you, they remind it of other value that you've delivered for the success of the enterprise. How many among us do this without expectation of a favor in return? And so roughly 22 years since the employment equity legislation came into force, the goal of a diverse and representative South African workforce remains elusive, held back by the doggedness and the stubborn individualism of the middle class. And therefore, the third factor for me is perhaps Black professionals who, like other middle classes in society, are an opportunistic class, and yet that are yet to discover the value of solidarity and supporting one another. We often stand and watch our colleagues suffer systematic and blatant discrimination and harassment. We talk about it in canteens and in overly extended telephone calls. We see them go for counseling and sometimes advise them to go for counseling. We stand and watch, do nothing, trusting that it will not happen to you. This carries on until one feels the weight of alienation and marginalization and proceeds to resign, with their self-esteem thoroughly battered and self-confidence completely destroyed. We have to ask ourselves, why? And why we never stand up for each other, even when it risks our positions in the enterprises. The fourth factor that may perhaps account for this is the role of Black organizations, including BMF, APSIP, and ABASA, and others. I say this because while we have a permissive constitutional framework that outlaws discrimination, we suffer. Black professional organizations are yet to master the activism of the type you see in the lobbyist AfriForum and the Trade Union Solidarity. Both entities, have over the years lobbied against employment equity as discriminatory and unfair. They take up individual cases of their members who they believe suffer discrimination. Their cause, as you and I know, has no legitimacy whatsoever, but they are impactful in challenging and driving it nonetheless. Our just cause notwithstanding, we seem to be on the back foot and less impactful. In fact, in 2017, many of you may have forgotten, AfriForum even complained to the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. To advance their agenda, both organizations, AfriForum and Solidarity Trade Union, have raised issues right up to the Constitutional Court, underscoring their organizational prowess and capacity. Imagine if the permissive constitutional framework were for the advancement of white South Africans. AfriForum would use them to good effect, which raises a question that we need to collectively answer tonight. Are we satisfied that as Black organizations, we are having the same effect And if not, what do we need to do to improve that? Now, without this capacity, the racism that is so prevalent in corporate South Africa today cannot be scientifically exposed and systematically dealt with. Wouldn't it be great if we found ourselves in a place where when they say BMF, it sends shivers down the spines of the anti-transformation forces in corporate South Africa? Simply put, I guess I'm arguing for the repurposing of Black professional bodies, because at the micro level of the enterprise, we are privy to the abuse of our own. We watch the abuse with disdain and complain on the margins, but we dare not stand up against the system. Instead, we take refuge in the public sector, including state-owned entities, and or starting doing our own thing, thereby defining ourselves away from the terrain of struggle, away from the battleground against racism in the workplace. And so the abuse of our own carries on and carries on, and we're perceived each time we sin there as refugees and not there in our own right. And so I guess I'm saying that as Black leaders, we must ask ourselves, what is our mission? Is it about taking comfort in being counted as the only Black professional to make it up to a certain level? Do you just go up the ladder only to kick it so no one ever makes it similarly? Are you complicit in the systematic exclusion of other Black professionals? What is your contribution to the transformation agenda of corporate South Africa? So as we grapple with the easing of lockdown restrictions, efficient use of the country's human resources is so pivotal to rehabilitate our economy. It starts with the people. In effect, we have a daunting task of realigning growth and steering the economy to a greener, ethical, and fairer track that pours deserved scorn on racism. The stark reality of the slow pace of transformation highlights the scale of the challenge that lie ahead of us. The time has come for the skeletons of racism to tumble out of the cupboards of corporate South Africa, and indeed that time is upon us. Concrete and sustained action is now required to end the injustice of racism, and to this end, I'd like to propose, if I may be so presumptuous, the following: that we should consider an immediate task as being the need to map out the ecosystem of existing support of Black professionals who are under siege, beyond just issuing hard-hitting statements. This will enable us to have a snapshot of what's working, what's not, what's adequately funded, what's not, and where the gaps exist, and how we should fill those gaps in order to ensure that we optimize our effectiveness and we collaborate. We must emerge from this discussion with concrete, actionable key pillars of capacitating organizations like BMF and others with clear milestones. We must put our money where our mouths are by ensuring that BMF is in a position of taking legal action and other action that would send the shivers down the spines of the anti-transformation forces that are masquerading as credible business leaders. We must develop a mechanism to name and shame those at the forefront of racial injustice in corporate South Africa, and collaborate with like-minded stakeholders to take the fight to racists. Let me conclude by saying this, that the rise of what is referred to as stakeholder capitalism demands active participation from all stakeholders in the fight against racism and other abuses in the workplace. As a business community in South Africa, broadly, we need to put ourselves onto the transparency and anti-racism test and ask hard questions about each other's conduct and its impact on the country's social cohesion efforts. And so I'm suggesting that the erosion of the agenda for social cohesion is not something that happens outside of our corporate environments. It is undermined there too. To emasculate the anti-transformation forces active in corporate South Africa, we must promote transparency, accountability, and integrity at all levels and across all sectors of our society. I have to tell you that I'm looking forward to pursuing dialogues in the business community to foster more disclosure and action against the scourge of racism in the workplace. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, posterity, you can be sure, will condemn us if we cling to individualism and forget that acting together, we can reverse some of the setbacks that we've seen in recent years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Butsipo, for some most profound contributions where you've really hit at the heart of the issues. Some of the items that really sadden me, but maybe feeling sad and feeling some sort of emotion is really what we need to spur us into action. When you mentioned saying that, the state of South Africa really speaks to a dream deferred. I mean, that's quite hard hitting. You also mentioned the chapter in your book, which I will definitely be the first to buy, in your memoir, A Liberated Black Professional, an Accomplice to Own Enslavement. I mean, that just really, I actually would like you to elaborate on that chapter a bit, but it's extremely profound. Then thirdly, I think before I open for an interactive session, I think when you spoke to, this is conversations that we regularly have, the impact of the Black professional organizations. I'm glad you spoke about AfriForum and Solidarity and litigating and taking, these they're taking us on head on, in terms of employment equity and Black economic empowerment. And in so doing so, in the courts, using the legal system, is that they are actually setting new precedences. And the precedences that they're legal precedences that will be then relied on by subsequent judges in subsequent cases. And the precedences that they are setting are really undoing all of the Black economic empowerment and employment equity legislation that was so, dedicatedly fought for. People even lost their lives for it. So that's something that we really need to watch quite closely as to why they are so effective in doing that. And lastly, you mentioned something that as the BMF we have long identified. We have set up the George Ngota Litigation Fund for exactly that reason, to say as Black professionals, we need to put our money where our mouth is. Besides the hard-hitting statements, we need to use the power of our numbers. I mean, we are literally about between 90 and 95% of the population of this country. We need to use the power of our numbers and put our money where our mouths is. And imagine if we could all contribute to something like the BMF's George Ngota Litigation Fund, and we start taking cases where Black professionals are being unfairly discriminated against in both subtle and overt ways, and we start, going to court over these issues, like we see the likes of AfriForum and Solidarity doing. So really, thank you. And you're absolutely spot on. And I think these conversations are absolutely critical. I think I will open for the Q&A. Our support team at the office did put on the chat group that people can start putting questions on the Q&A. I see people have started doing so. Thank you very much. Butsipo, I think I'll take in rounds of 5. Is that okay? Okay, all right. Okay, so I'll move to the Q&A so that we can have a more interactive discussion now. I think I've said quite a lot. From Duduzi Zingi, how can BMF ensure that Black professionals who want to impart their experiences to young people while helping to create employment have the support necessary for their ventures to succeed? Bulali Dazana, my question is, where and when do we, as Black South Africans, draw the line between transformation and the ground up development of our own industries? We live in a time where the world is changing very fast, creating new economies. Can we say we've been responsible in ensuring that we are educationally prepared to take advantage of those new economies? An anonymous attendee, there seems to be an issue of gaslighting in corporate spaces where we are told that the board is going to work towards a more colorful enterprise, but often we find that throughout the year, disadvantaged groups continue to be left behind or fill insignificant positions. How are we going to tackle this subtle resistance? Liza Lise Dingalibala. Mr. Pityana, what are the major decisive points of action which need to be undertaken by civil formations such as BMF to curb the fallback of the transformation agenda? Secondly, should the Black upward mobility culture not be shifted from mentorship to the sponsorship paradigm? How many is that, Putsipo? 4. But I think it's a lot already. I think go for it. Then we'll do another round. Thanks.
Well, I think that maybe let me start with the last one, because I think the first one maybe BMF president might address with regard to the role of BMF. With regard to positions of civil society in this, I mean, you know, the struggle for freedom didn't stop in 1994. It is an ongoing project. What prevailed in 1994 was the unraveling of conditions that make it possible to push the boundaries for that to happen. We have to navigate our way through that. That's why it's important that we shouldn't be holding on to the coattails of government, but we should have the capacity to push the envelope all the time. And the point that I was making there about sponsorship in corporates does not remove the importance of mentors and all of that. But I have to tell you that it's no accident of history that you have bright Black youngsters at school and at university passing in flying colors, and when they get in a corporate environment, the darts that they bit at school outperform them in a corporate environment. It's that thing called sponsor. Somebody knows who they are, whose son they are, who they are related to, and pushes them and propels them, offers them opportunities, justifies and explains away their shortcomings. Though the few of us that are in the corporate environment, have a duty and a responsibility to play that role. It's not an easy role, but it's one that we must carry because we are few. Anonymous is raising a very important point about Blacks and occupying insignificant roles. So we talk about glass ceilings, and then there's a phenomenon that is underexplored, and that speaks to what is called pigeonholes. Pigeonholes are those little boxes where you put letters in the post office, called post office box if you use the postnet. So this little box, a pigeonhole, belongs to Black people. This one is for white people. This one is for etc., etc. So, albeit not longer allowed in legislation, but there is an undercurrent of unstated rules that channel Black people to certain roles that are marginal and sidelined. So I think that it's those things that we should have the capacity and the capability to to fight all the time and so consistently. I don't know that there's a line to be drawn between transformation for Black advancement and development. These things are interrelated. I believe that obtaining basic qualifications, getting experience, opens up the vistas. The difference between pursuing those and taking advantage of those vistas is when those opportunities are shut from you. The pathways for you to take advantage of those is shut from you. One of the things that happens with Black people generally, and I'm not suggesting that there's something wrong with continuous learning and education, is that when you're frustrated with a hostile and alienating environment, you feel that you need to go and collect another certificate because the system tells you are inadequate. And sometimes, actually, it's the system that is just blatantly wrong. It's got nothing to do with your being underqualified or anything of the sort. I'll hand over to the president of the BMF now.
Yes, thanks, Butsipo. Yes, President, please come in for all the BMF sort of specific questions. And after yourself, I know our Gauteng chair, Ms. Mpho Museki, had her hand up. She's put it down again, but Mpho, if you want to come in after the president, you're welcome to. Thank you.
Thanks, Butsipo. I think there's one particular question before I go to the specific BMF one. There's one particular question that is asked about when do we find, or how do we find the thin line between building our own businesses parallel to the existing businesses. And I've had discussions around this matter. But remember, it's important. It's quite critical. It's without a doubt that there is a need for the emergence of Black-owned, new, organic, innovative businesses. That's without a doubt. But you're not going to have a significant number of them if you don't transform and manage the economy, because all the businesses, to be successful, they need capital investment. They need the necessary skills set to create them. Now, the quagmire we find ourselves in South Africa, let's look at the ITC. I saw a comment about ITC. Let's look at the mandate that ITC have in creating an industrial funding or industrial base in our country. Today, the top-notch businesses that you find anywhere in the world are mainly tech companies or are in the technology space. And the limited resources, if you were to go to ITC tomorrow and ask them to draw up a report on the funding that they have done in all the innovative ideas we come across from the Black youngsters in the technology space, you will find that there's almost none. And they used to have an IT fund, something related to that, and they even closed that. Now you have an economy that is growing and leaning towards technology and innovation, but you don't have a dedicated DFI in South Africa, Development Finance Institution in South Africa, that seizes those opportunities and puts seed capital for those Black participants to come in. The second point is that the whole pension fund market, including asset managers and venture capitalists and other players, I can tell you there is a limited number of Black people that are able to access capital from those institutions. and you add to that crisis, you put in the banks, Putsipo. If you go and analyze the loan books of the banks from the business side, business funding, business loans, leave the vehicle finance, leave the personal loans, leave the housing finance, look at the business funding portfolio of the banks of South Africa. It's without a doubt, there is no significant or critical mass of Black businesses that are funded by those institutions. So the ability for us to build a parallel structure or parallel businesses to augment, by the way, when we do that, the productive side of our economy, which informs and influences the size and the growth of our GDP, would be without a doubt, if you bring in, the reason why we have a problem, an economic quagmire, by the way, and other people are busy diagnosing economic reforms and all the other things, which are important. But the major issue that is stifling and stagnating our economy is the fact that there is a more than necessary number of Black people that are not participating in the mainstream economy. They are not participating, whether from the productive side of things or even consumption side, because they are buying power. You're giving 4 million people 350 rands from the social grant system, that the COVID relief grant. So if you don't get Black people to be in the mainstream economy, be employed, create businesses, you're not going to get there. Now, if you say, let's not concentrate on transforming the existing businesses, then I can tell you now, it's going to take you forever. Because remember, the structure of SA's economy is that there's a concentration. These businesses have occupied a very uncompetitive structures. They've created them. There is a big four in every sector, big four, big five. So to penetrate the economy in this day and age and create a business of Discovery size, Discovery is not going to wait for you to do that. They have the capital, they have the resources, they can buy any skill, and they will eat you for lunch. Now we need the state, which is government, to intervene and create an opportunity. Because all we are crying for as Black people, we are not crying for us to be given handouts. All we are crying for is that the system and the enabling environment that exists in our country must give us an opportunity based on our skill set and our own capabilities and efforts to get into the mainstream economy. We mustn't be excluded purely because of race. Because as things stand, all these things, these critical aspects I've counted, are only exclusionary to Black people because of their skin color. You can argue anywhere else. If you go, you can get your own friend to change just the name of the company you've used and present the same financials to the bank, and he just writes Mr. Van Donder. The reception will be different. And some of us are in business who have experienced these things. That's the first. The second one is that the first question was, how does the BMF help thriving? We call them professional entrepreneurs because we are not in the NAFCOC space, so we don't represent hawkers entrepreneurs. We represent professionals that could then decide to go and open their own businesses. We have them as our members. Now, there, it's actually a very important thing that the country needs to also focus on, because in the tender system, we have seen, colleagues, without a lie, the people that have benefited, and the tender system was supposed to be an incubator of top-class Black businesses that can then get 2-3 times the opportunities in the tendering, but can anchor themselves to the economy as a whole, even including the value chains of private sector companies. But the tendering system had favored, opportunistically so, these illiterate vagrants who goes on and become splashing hundreds, thousands and thousands of rands and buy expensive whatever, and they don't even do the job. But if you were to say to Transnet, take a certain grouping of the engineers that you have trained for the last 5 years, ask them, if you are opening a tender, ask them to be the ones that would apply for this tender. They've been working inside, give them the opportunity to go outside, but they must be the ones preferred for this bid. And then we plug in the other engineers who are coming out from university and others to be employees there. And now you have people that understand the offering. So if we're not going to be deliberate like the Afrikaners were, using the state-owned entities to enhance and augment their people in business, SAA is collapsing, and people are still wondering, why must it? But there should have been an identified grouping of Black top civil aviation professionals and business people that can join themselves together, and they go to PIC, get the money, buy equity at SAA, and run the business. Deliberately so, because that's what those state-owned enterprises were originally created for by the apartheid government. They gave equity stakes. Now, the question that would come is, who would get first? Which is what we have seen with even the BE deals. Who would get these opportunities? But it's very easy to answer that question because we know that there are top-class Black professionals at Old Mutual, at Sanlam, and everywhere else. Now, if we want to create another insurer or assurance company, then you go and take those individuals, those that have the entrepreneurial zeal and that are willing to go and venture into this thing. You group them together, you take ITC money, you back them. And as government, you give them the clients, the first clients becomes the government employees, pensions, or something like that. Now, we want to have an idealistic way of empowering Black people, not a practical way. You're not going to get Black people because the economy is an open market economy. And I don't think the world over, I don't think we can change that. I don't advocate for socialism. We must create a market economy, but the winners amongst the Black people must be advanced so that they can create jobs for the second layer grouping of Black people, so that the communities and the youngsters that are born in Diepsloot and other places don't have a once in 1,000 chance to become a policeman. Why is it that a Black child being born in South Africa becomes a curse 26 years down the line? And it's something else to be 26 years down the line with a plan. But it was just 26 years down the line with no direction. We don't know whether we're coming or going. And in fact, things are deteriorating. So the argument that BMF sits with here is that we have, colleagues, have to, impassionately so, capacitate the state, give it as the privileged few professionals who went to school and acquired these skills. The type of skills that Babu Pitjana had when they took over democracy has quadrupled from Black professionals' point of view. So our abilities to manage the state should be 3-4 times their ability that they did, stellingly so in the beginning years of our democracy. But we are not there. We have opened the space. Our fault. We have opened the space, and when the space is opened, there's no vacuum here. Somebody else will fill it in. That's why we have the type of professionals, politicians we have. That's why we have the type of directors in the state-owned enterprises we have. That's why the whole patronage system, that's why we are now presided over by people who have no abilities of anything besides stealing. It's our fault, colleagues. Thank you, Esed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I won't even comment. I think Mr. Ms. Mpho, please come in. And then we are also joined by Mr. Carl Sotikwa from our sponsor, Sanlam. Mr. Carl, ndicela ukuqubula. So after Mpho, I would ask that you make a few remarks, and then I'll go back to the Q&A. Thanks. Mpho? Okay, maybe she's dropped off. Her hand was up for quite some time. Would Carl Sotikwa like to come in, or should I go to the Q&A? Just give me an indication.
As Carl is wondering whether to come in or not, I just wanted to say that a very important point that was raised by the president of the BMF in response to a question about Black professionals, Black business, etc., and whether there's a dichotomy between the two and Black professional formations. I'm sure Carl, when he comments, he will tell you that once upon a time, I don't know if this still exists, we had an organization called Black Business Executive Circle. And the idea was to create a forum, a networking platform that brings Black professionals in corporates, Black businesses, the emerging, and Black executives in the public sector. And we're networking and thinking about so that there's cross-pollination of ideas and perspectives of what we need to do together across the economy to advance the agenda for transformation. We need to be careful because I think that it's important that we reflect on where those fora are, because they offer a very important opportunity. For no good reason and no justification, competent Black professionals see the only place where they can get work being the public sector. It is because the private sector does not afford your Black engineers, your Black lawyers, your Black auditors, etc., professional organizations, opportunities to be given work in there. If you follow through on those kinds of patterns of discrimination in corporates and challenge them systematically, it is possible to reverse them. There's no reason why Black professionals who have decided to run their professional businesses instead of being in corporates or in government shouldn't be able to get business from established corporates in South Africa. It's blatant discrimination. So among the things that I'm talking about in pushing the boundaries of discrimination that prevails in corporate South Africa is challenging exactly those kinds of practices. We need to talk about how we use platforms like that to explore what do we do now that we have the financial services sector, and Carl might comment on this coming from Sanlam and the banks, that there is a commitment to spend a certain amount of money supporting Black business. What does that mean? How does it translate? So that we're not just focusing on getting money from PIC and IDC. How do we enable that to happen? As Black professionals, we occupy some very strategic positions in corporates. And this is the point about the chapter I was telling you about, because in fact, it is, we are prevalent in places like human resources. We compile these employment equity reports that go to the Department of Labor that present glowing pictures of companies when we know that in fact they are not fulfilling the employment equity requirements that are there. We compile the data that goes to report on compliance with regard to Black economic empowerment scorecards. We participate in etc. So we need to have conversations about what does it mean to be located in those roles and exposing some of the discriminatory practices that are calculated and have the effect of marginalizing Black people from those businesses. All those kinds of things, I think, are strategies that we should explore and how we employ them to push the boundaries so that we're not just dependent on what the state is able to do. We've had a lot of openings that are out there, but the door remains shut because we're not pushing it hard enough. We need to think about what strategies we employ to push the door that is ajar wide open.
Right. I think Mpho has been let in.
Yes. Hi, Esetu. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, loud and clear.
Thank you for really a great discussion so far, Ntate Pichana. I'm really excited and encouraged. Like Esetu, I'm looking forward to your book. Certainly when it comes out, I'll be one of the first people. So I used to work in the mining industry a while back, so my questions are really going to be around just the mining industry, and also just around I mean, the exciting bit about having you is your role, the role you played around NEDLAC, and also being in a position to influence policy. First question is around just transformation generally in the mining industry. I looked at, if I were to put you on the spot, Anglo Ashanti, the executives, the picture is not looking that great, especially as it relates to women. And so I just want to understand, what are the challenges, and what do you think can be done to help transform businesses a lot more? I think back to when I was graduating, in terms of the number of women that graduated, certainly in metallurgy in my class, and in mining engineering. I believe, I'd like to believe that they still some of them are still in the industry. Another one is just around, I think, linking back to your statement around us stealing from the poor, and just around, transformation in general. I wanted to understand your views around, opening up and the disclosures around mining rights as a way to curb corruption in the mining industry. Thank you.
Butsipo, can I ask that you just hold on responding to that? I'm not yet getting a signal if Mr. Sochikwa has been let in. Can I maybe just read some questions from the Q&A, because they're really piling up? So I'll read you 4 more, and then with them pause as well. Okay, thank you, Mr. Pityana, for that presentation. It was quite informative. I have one question. As the leader in transformation, how are you contributing to the cause in many of the companies that you sit on boards of? Looking at one specific redefine, where there is a male white executive team, that's Tonelwa Nkomo. Angus Norki, to resolve any issue, you need to be real and true. Thank you for a truthful, hard-hitting address. What do we do when we find government entities like IDC not implementing Black industrialist policies? Last year, they only spent 44% on Black business, yet they're turning away Black industrialists. Just give me a second, Butsipo. They're jumping around as people are asking questions. Sponsors, Tabong Khare, sponsors of Black corporate leaders are the force behind our regress. And year in and year out, we hear the economy is not growing, and that's the reason we don't progress. I think the constitution of our country is to be blamed in how economic activities are monitored and audited. As Black professional organizations, how do we lobby for the amendment of the constitution, and will that be necessary? The last one, I think, before I give you a chance to answer, Butsipo from Azola Mayekiso, HR executives are the worst. They work for the very CEOs who want to maintain the status quo and thus become gatekeepers of the system. They unfortunately have no power nor the courage to challenge the management teams. How do organizations such as BMF assist in a real way in this regard, as they themselves are funded by these very corporates? Yeah, hard-hitting one there, Azola. Butsipo, I think I'll give you a chance to answer those questions.
Yeah, I think that HR executives are perceived to be weak because they are isolated. And we need to look at that and turn it around and say, given the fact that we have a predominant presence in HR roles, and I see that there's a reversal of that trend, by the way, with an increasing number of white executives wanting to occupy the HR space. We have not used that sufficiently strategically. So one of the things that I think BMF needs to think about is how we build solidarity platforms with HR practitioners to enable them to whistleblow, to enable them to expose bad practices of discrimination that shut out Black people. We need to provide frameworks that will make for safe spaces for them to drive that agenda. Because as I indicated earlier on, Black professionals, like most professionals, are typical middle class that's opportunistic. So you have commitments, you don't want to do anything that is going to cost you your job, etc., etc. So invariably, it is about making sure that you survive and live for another day. You do what as you're told. So what do we do to make sure that, given the strategic space that these HR practitioners, many of whom are members of the BMF, are enabled to use that space to advance and push the boundaries of transformation? The second point that has been raised is that what do we do to reform the constitution or amend the constitution to ensure that it enables the advancement of transformation? I have to tell you that my reading of the constitution, having been involved in the conceptualization of it, the constitution, in fact, is a statement that mandates society to drive transformation. The transformation in society is a constitutional imperative. It's a constitutional mandate. All of these things, that's why I made the point earlier on that the likes of AfriForum pushing the agenda against transformation finds that, in fact, the interpretation by the judges of our land have successfully and consistently made the point against their pushback on transformation. So the transformation is a constitutional imperative. So the constitution, in fact, doesn't inhibit transformation. It is a very powerful enabling tool. Some of the discriminatory practices in workplaces are breaches of the equality provisions of the constitution. And we could easily use the courts, including human rights, the equality courts, and other courts generally, to challenge, in terms of the constitution and the laws of the country, why things are not being done in a way that advances that. And that's the point I'm making, that the environment we're living in, unlike before 1994, is a lot more permissive for us to advance the agenda for transformation. I want to come back to the point that is being raised, which essentially says, so if you are so passionate about transformation, what happens in environments where you are? I believe that corporates are a terrain of engagement, and they're a contested terrain at that. So the pushback against transformation is there. Our responsibility as Black leadership who are in those spaces is to constantly push. It doesn't mean that we're going to get an easy ride, but it does mean that we must stand up and fight nonetheless. And I think that, by the way, I assumed the role of chairman of Redefine last year. You must look at the makeup of the board of Redefine from what it was before, and the gender profile of that, I think, must be standing at about 60-70% women, compared to what you'll find on most JSC boards. Indeed, that sets the scene for the driving the agenda for a transformation of the executive leadership and other structures. And this is firmly on the agenda. And already one of the executives appointed looking after sustainability is in fact a woman. We've made space to appoint, to identify a finance director or CFO who would be preferably a Black woman. And indeed, if we can't find a Black woman, we'll identify a Black person, woman or male. But indeed, we've embarked on this. We've got a clear strategy to drive the transformation there. There is a common commitment from the board and the executive of Redefine to ensure that the transformation agenda is advanced there. There are targets set, and they're very clear, and they're monitored by the board. And you must hold us to account on that and challenge us all the time. Similarly, with Anglo Gold Ashanti, we're part of the 30% club in terms of the board. At any given time, about 40% of our board members are women. Similarly, we have a similar commitment with regard to race at executive level. We have, comparatively speaking, in the mining industry, we probably have about 30 to 40% of the executive leadership that is women, until the resignation in June of one of the women. So our agenda is firmly shows commitment to that at other levels of senior vice presidents, etc., and lower on. We have clear targets in respect of that. So there is a clear focus to drive the agenda for transformation in all of this. But if I said to you that it is a shining example of how well we've done transformation, I would be misleading you. It's a constant battle that we have to fight at all levels. The staff in the organization must drive that agenda. Those of us in the leadership of the organization must drive that agenda. With regard to disclosures around mining rights, I'm not quite clear what that means, but the fact of the matter is that the conditions that come with mining rights that are granted to all mining companies, we have to comply with the mining charter that drives the agenda for transformation. And Anglo Gold Ashanti can claim to be a leader, not just in the mining industry, but in the country in general, in contributing to the emergence of affording opportunities for black entrepreneurs, etc. So this is a commitment that we made, we live up to. It's not about compliance. We believe that it is who we are as an organization, and I believe that there's still a lot of room to be made to improve on that. So my point, the fact that you have a Sipho Pijana as the chair of the board doesn't mean that it will be easy to have transformation happen, but you can be sure that that agenda will be advanced. It means that those of you who are in the various organizations which you occupy, I'm sure Bonang will tell you the same thing, and Roel Khoza would have said the same thing, and others, that in the various parts of the leadership of the organization, you have to play your part too.
Thank you, Sipho. Mr. Sotlikwa, are you ready? Okay. I will let Mr. Sotlikwa come in when we're done. When we ask the panelists, including the BMF president, our keynote speaker, and then Mr. Sotlikwa to make closing remarks. So, Putsipa, I'll do a last round of questions. I've noticed that some of the themes are quite repetitive. So if you find it to be repetition, you don't have to address it. We'll just do the last round of the Q&A. Just give me a second to find my place. Okay, I'm worried about older Black corporate leadership, those who benefited from affirmative action, not being intentional about the development and support of young Black professionals. And as you rightly put it, the absence of sponsorship and the creation of glass ceiling for young Black professionals. I have observed your peers being gatekeepers for white privilege and preservers of their own privilege by downplaying corporate racism. How do you challenge your peers to be sponsors and break glass ceilings? The next one is very direct, it's from Ms. Lili Moabi. Do you think privatization is a way to fix poor performance in SOEs, as in the case with SAA? I think those are the last two, Putsipo, without really repeating themes. If you can just address those, then I can see, Mr. Sotlikwa is ready now.
Well, let me start with the last question. The idea of privatization or not is a false debate from my perspective. We have an endowment of state-owned entities that could help position this economy as a pivotal driver of the transformation of the African continent. If for a moment you can imagine a crisis-ridden Eskom today, envisaged and thought of as an electricity generator that would enable energy generation on the continent and fast-track the growth of the economy of the continent, not just for South Africa, but for the continent, you would be less preoccupied with whether you create competition for Eskom in South Africa or not, and be more seized with opportunities that that offers. And in the process, you would be open-minded about allowing and enabling injection of capital, either through bringing equity participants in an Eskom through various structures, creative structures of enabling private sector investment or public-private participation in driving that agenda. So it doesn't have to be either or. There can be collaborative platforms, there can be. So these state-owned entities need to be thought of differently from where they were in the era when the Afrikaner established them. We have state-owned entities who have not thought beyond what they were intended to be at the time. Others are moribund, and they have no business being in state hands anymore, and we should not be ideological about that. We should let go of them. Others, it makes sense to keep them in state hands without any private sector participation. So it should not be, it's not either or. We should look at each and every one of them. And I think that the narrative in business should move away from the idea that the state should not be participant in the economies. There's a very good reason to have state participation in the economy, but that participation has to be limited, it has to be competent, it has to be clearly defined. But the most important thing, you must create and look at opportunities to crowd in private sector investment, to enable competitiveness, to enable access to capital, technology, skills, etc., etc. The outmoded notions that the state has to hoard and run these things 100% doesn't work. If you look at how modernization of state-owned entities in different parts of the world, it has taken various permutations to great effect and benefit to those economies. We should just be open-minded and be focused on how addressing the question that says, how do we use these entities to drive the economic trajectory that will enable us to lift our people out of the poverty that they are in? With regard to the question around older generation, this phenomenon is not just about older generation of Black corporate leaders, by the way. It's across the board. It's about people who don't appreciate the sense of ambassadorship that they occupy as Black people, that every space they occupy is an opportunity to open space for others. It's not an opportunity to hoard. It's not an opportunity to shine and shine alone. It is an opportunity to open those gates wider so that others can come in. It's an instance for you to say, there are many more like me from whence I come. And I think that if we adopt that attitude, Black leaders in corporates will open up a lot of opportunities for others who are being shut out. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Butsipo. That was quite a lot of questions. I'm sure you are picking up the common themes. As I've said, I think there's a perception that there's an old guard who's almost, not making way for the youth or younger Black professionals to really rise. There's also really frustration around getting funding for Black businesses. We do have these development finance institutions that are supposedly configured exactly for that purpose, but you find them, equally struggling to fund Black business. And I mean, being a banker myself, I know that even things like risk rating models, how we then look at a customer, a client, and how we even price the client is still very biased towards small Black emerging business. We view them as inherently more risky. We price them higher, and most times they don't even really qualify based on our lending criteria. And then if you move into the corporate space, again, it's really just about Black executives and how they are either gatekeeping or facilitating and assisting. And you used a very specific word called sponsorship. I think we mistake mentorship, and we use the word loosely, and networking, but sponsorship is sort of mentorship of a special type. And I think our white counterparts get this right so well. There's a concept called being an executive assistant, and I think as Black people we think you are sort of glorified PA, but that is the pinnacle of sponsorship, where you work hand in hand with a CEO. And if you look at the Michael Jordans of this world, and there are countless other examples, most executive assistants have then absolutely been, they've had meteoric rises to heading up divisions, large divisions, and ultimately, the group in its entirety. So I think those are the themes that I've really picked up from the Q&A. We were meant to close at 7:30, but I mean, I really think the audience is still very much engaged. I'm personally very much engaged, and thank you, Butsipo. I think I would just like to, I don't know, Butsipo, after speaking for so long, if you'd like to make closing remarks, but I will open for Mr. Nomlala. I think perhaps let's start with Mr. Sotrikwa, then Butsipo, if you want to come in, Mr. Nomlala, if you want to come in, just to make closing remarks before we close. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me. I really think we've had quite an amazing afternoon of amazing insights from two brothers who I happen to know very well personally as well. And I just wanted to say that, well, firstly to the BMF, I think this is an amazing platform that's been created here for engagement on topics of critical importance for all of us and for our country. So well done to Andile, the president, and the team at BMF, and really let's continue with these sort of platforms, and also to the speakers this evening and our keynote speaker Butsipo. I really couldn't expect less from both Butsipo and Andile on this very, very important topic for our country, which is one on transformation. I think we no longer have the time to pay lip service to the topic of transformation. We need to be action oriented, and certainly I know these two individuals that spoke here this evening, and also the insights that they shared, really speak to people that believe in being action oriented towards doing rather than talking about this very critical topic for our country and for our economy. So I don't want to spoil the insights. I think I've certainly absorbed a lot from what has been said this evening. I certainly hope that everyone else has as well. I think through our partnership as well with the BMF as Sanlam, this is why we are in this partnership, is because we really are wanting to take a meaningful approach to the topic of transformation. This is also a portfolio that I've recently taken over as part of the group, and working together with organizations such as the BMF. I do want to make sure that we make a meaningful impact in driving transformation in our country, in the various sectors, in our economy as well, and taking our country forward. So thank you very much to the speakers, and thank you for allowing us as Sanlam to be part of this evening and this journey. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sotrikwa. I hope you don't mind that, yes, but you look like you're always ready. Thanks for that contribution, and thanks once again to Sanlam for being a really, really key sponsor of the BMF, who walks along with us on so many initiatives that we undertake. I think let's go to BMF President and then end with Uputsipo. then I will just close after that. Thanks. Closing remarks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Esetu. I won't spare any more minutes because we do take cognizance of time of book, particularly for our guests and the participants. So for me to just say thank you, Putsipo, for your time, and thanks, Carl, for coming in. And we really appreciate the support that Sanlam as an organization gives to the PMF. With those few words, I say thank you to the participant and my fellow colleagues in the board and management of PMF. Thank you, Esetu.
Putsipo, would you like to close, or do you think you've said enough?
Well, thank you very much. I think it's left to me to thank you, to thank the BMF for this incredible conversation point and the feedback that I've received. I found it very, very interesting, and the questions that were raised, we could spend all evening exploring these things. And of course, the purpose of this get together is to raise the issues, and we pick them up as we reflect on a going forward basis. All I will say is that as the leadership of the PMF, you must know that you are driving an agenda that is about the vision of our nation. You have history on your side, fearlessly charge and make sure that we push the boundaries of transformation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Putsipo. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for us for this evening. I would like to really thank the team in the BMF head office supporting us in the background with this webinar. I'd like to thank my fellow board members, BMF President. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Socikwa and Putsipo. Thank you very, very much for what has been an absolutely engaging conversation. And I mean, I did touch on some of the points that went straight to the heart, really, that you spoke about. I'd like to thank all BMF sponsors, affiliates, and all BMF members. Thanks for staying with us this long on a Friday evening. I saw we had about 80 to 100 guests, which is absolutely fantastic. Please do enjoy your weekend and keep safe. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All the best.